January Fireside Chat with the South Dakota Afterschool Network. Really appreciate this month. We're really focusing on advocacy and what that means. I think that tends to be a little scary word for folks because I think we end up, when we think advocacy, we think lobbying and politicians and climates and political climates and current fields. But we want to make this as easy as possible and have some really great experts in today. I'm going to do just a quick show of something that I'm going to come back to a little bit later in the show. But I want to show you our website. So we have a legislative map that we have updated that will break down programs and show programs by legislative district. Now we have a big event that's coming up February 2nd in partnership with SODAC-SECA. Really, SODAC-SECA is the host. We just really kind of assist however we can, but Day at the Capitol is coming up February 2nd. We are hosting a reception February 1st from 5:30 to 7 for legislators just to come meet with after-school professionals for those that can make it, and that will be at the Missouri Avenue Event Center, and we'll be sending more details out next week about what that looks like. But just kind of want to put that on everyone's radar. If you can make it to Pier on February 2nd for Day at the Capitol, that would be absolutely amazing. Obviously, we know with COVID and Omicron and that things are, it has to be to comfort level. So we just want you to make the best decisions you can. But we've been running this map on our website for the past year and a half. It really talks about how many programs we have. I'm not going to go into all the detail, but one of the fun little features is at the very top of this, you hit legislative district. So everything else was kind of by county before, and now by legislative district. And after this session, I want to be very clear, after this session, we're going to have to update that and change it up just a little bit because legislative districts changed, right? And what that means for everyone. But without further ado, I would like to introduce Matt Watrous. The funny thing, I have funny stories with both of these folks, and I'm going to tell them at some point. So I didn't tell them that I was telling this, but here's my fun connection to Matt. Not only did we work together with the Boys and Girls Club, Matt's family he went to his grandparents' farm in the summers in the same small town about 7 miles away. His family grew up in Cross Timbers, Missouri, and I grew up in Preston, and nobody would know either one of those places, but they are literally less than 10 miles away. And we just kind of have that rural Missouri connection. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Matt.
Thanks, Billy, and good morning, everybody. It is funny because I was in a group like this in Missouri when I first started in this role, and I asked people if anybody, it was like probably 40 people in the room, raise your hand if you know where Cross Timbers is. And no one, I think one person raised their hand. It was a lobbyist that raised his hand. So like literally no one knows in the state where this place is, and Billy and I have connections to that. So it's really great. Yeah, it's great to be with you all. I love South Dakota. It's one of my favorite places to visit. I'm Government Relations Director for Boys and Girls Clubs of America in the Midwest region. And so I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan, but I've been able to get to South Dakota probably 6-7 times in the last 4 years as I've been in this role. And such a beautiful, wonderful state. Love going to Pier. Before I was in this role with Boys and Girls Clubs of America, I actually worked on the ground. I was in the state of Washington, running our state alliance, which is a 501c4 advocacy organization. And before that, I was with Boys and Girls Clubs in the Seattle market. And I appreciate, Billy, that you called Dana and I experts. I certainly don't subscribe to that label. For all of you on this call, you're probably managing many things. And advocacy is something sort of I got into, luckily. I have a social work background, so it's not something that I've been trained in. It's just something that I picked up along the way, but it is an exciting thing to do in out of school time. I actually was just on a weekly coalition call with the Michigan Afterschool Partnership, which is Billy's counterpart organization in the state of Michigan. Yeah, those are weekly calls that I'm on with many providers talking about how do we do this work in out of school time together. So this is what I sort of live and breathe every day, and it's exciting to be on here with you. And I'll throw it over to Dana Benjamin Allen.
Awesome, thanks, Matt. Hi, everybody. My name is Dana Benjamin Allen. I am founder of Back of the Napkin Consulting. I hail in Boston, Massachusetts. And I have had the luxury of working with both Billy and Matt during my time at Boys and Girls Clubs. And I call myself an accidental evaluator. I've worked at small youth serving organizations. I used to be the director of research and evaluation at the Boys and Girls Clubs of Boston. And then similar to Matt, I served as the director of evaluation for a 501c4 coalition of all the clubs in Massachusetts. And then I worked in data and evaluation for the Boys and Girls Clubs of America for a few years before starting my own firm about when the pandemic started. Since we're among family and we're working with youth serving organizations, the image that is over my left shoulder is when we were trying to increase the likelihood of young people taking surveys at my Boys and Girls Club. And in order for us to up the ante and get kids to take said survey, they got to put a pie in my face. So that's what that picture is, to show you that I really did used to work frontline in youth development work. And my goal and my hope is to ensure that to demystify and make approaching and using data a lot less scary, because you are the experts and I want to make sure that you have the microphone and feel empowered. So back to you, Billy, or back to you, Matt.
Yeah, we're just gonna go right.
Back to you, Matt.
We'll go right into it. And just, I would encourage folks to drop comments, questions, ideas in the chat as we're going along. I think I'm going to spend a few minutes here just like laying the groundwork on how I approach advocacy and what I encourage for you all as providers of youth services in your local community. And Dana's going to provide some incredible resources in thinking about data and engagement of elected officials. And I've known Dana for many years and have really admired the work that she does in this. And she's helped us in our state alliances and with providers in the local community doing this really, really well. So I told Billy that I was not going to follow Dana because I, never would want to do that. So that's why I get to go first. And the first step in this that I would encourage folks to think about is, what is your why? What is it that you're hoping to get out of an advocacy effort, and know what that why is and what's driving sort of your goals. For us, some of the whys that I've used over the years, funding is certainly a big one. So how do we access state, local, or federal funds? What policy changes are we interested in affecting at the state level or local level? What relationship building for long-term opportunities might we be interested in? And or did somebody tell you to come to this fireside chat and you need to learn about advocacy and that? So always know what your why is, because that's going to be your starting place. And then we start to get to the other components. For me, the why always starts with impact. What is the impact of good advocacy? And I want to talk a little bit about COVID advocacy and COVID funding advocacy, just to give an example of how being effective as an advocate has been really successful for out-of-school time organizations. And the examples I want to provide are ones in which Boys and Girls Clubs have actually worked with partners like the YMCA, with the Afterschool Alliance, and been incredibly successful. So through that coalition work, during COVID, there have been a number of states where we leveraged funding resources that we had never before seen possible. And I'm just going to rattle off some numbers just to give you a sense for the scope of this. In Oregon, $15 million. In Wisconsin, $60 million. In Michigan, $10 million. In just recently in Massachusetts, which was not on my list, but I see Dana there, $20 million if you count the Y and Boys and Girls Club together. South Dakota with the YMCA, $5 million. Minnesota with the After School Network, $26 million. Indiana, $150 million. And a lot of these are over 2 years, so it sounds like big numbers, and they are big numbers, but they do get, the nice thing is a sustainability track on that. And then in Iowa, $7 million. So it just gives you a sense in each of those examples, those are where we were working with other partners and other providers, or under the umbrella of the After School Network, to secure dollars from leaders in state government at the state level to provide resources for programs across the state in that given state. And so what we had to do was build towards getting that. And that's a little bit of what I wanted to touch on for a few minutes. So, in order to be successful, oftentimes it took many years of work to get to where we got last year. But that wasn't always the case. So in some examples, we were able to, in a very short period of time, start to advocate and get some things across the finish line. So both of those were tacks that were successful for us in COVID advocacy. So that was my why is around impact and what we can do to drive support for local programs. We also need to identify, what is the what and what is the how. And at Boys and Girls Clubs, what we've leaned into to accomplish that is around creating an advocacy plan. We encourage our statewide network to create an advocacy plan for the state, and we encourage our local affiliates to come up with an advocacy plan for their community. And I know all of you are managing a lot right now. And so coming up with another plan and doing another thing is challenged. That's where, again, the why will help drive your motivation and your reason for doing it. And I also encourage our programs to keep it simple. Come up with an annual plan. I love that we're talking about this in early January. What is your plan for 2022 going to look like? It can be very simple. It can have a goal or a couple goals. It can have some very concrete steps and hopefully some targets or some metrics in which you're going to measure success. And we look at 3 areas of focus within our advocacy plans. The first, and I talked a lot about this in terms of funding, is the COVID funding is funding. That is one of the key outcomes we look at. So you ask yourself, what do we need? Do we need dollars for a specific program? Do we need infrastructure or capital or facility improvement dollars? Do we need something that would drive a new partnership? So what is the funding opportunity? What is the outcome going to look like there? And how are we going to build a plan around that? The second area of focus, and albeit something that's not getting as much attention right now, is really around policy goals. So are there laws that you would want to impact that can support your program, the youth that you serve, the structure of your program? I'll give one recent example. There was a wave of laws being enacted over the last few years around tobacco. One of them was T21 or tobacco to 21, which was age of use laws and rules. Another was around vaping laws, marketing to kids, things like that. So not funding related, but we would oftentimes advocate around those issues because those policies could impact, our programs and the kids that we serve. And then the third area, sort of a broad area, is around activities and mobilization. These are your outputs. These are your steps in the plan. And there's endless possibilities with the activities that you could consider engaging on in a given year. And so you want to be really mindful that whatever you put into the plan is something that you can achieve and is something that was in reach and is not going to overwhelm. And so I've got a list that I just want to sort of highlight as some of the activities and areas that we found have the most efficacy, and they could cascade and build on each other in different ways. But the first thing that I always recommend programs do is get your legislators into your sites. So one goal for 2022 could be all of your legislators in your region. Might be in one legislative district, so you'd have 3 or so. You might be in 2 or 3, so you'd have a few more. Get all your legislators into your program in the calendar year, right? And then it can build on from there. If you have a chance, go to Peer for an advocacy day. Billy highlighted February 2nd. I always think it's a great idea to have leaders come to you and on your turf and see your programs in action, but also to show the commitment to them by going to them, showing up in where they work in Peer and taking the effort to visit them. And it's a great opportunity. Something that's great to layer into that is youth voice and youth advocacy. I always recommend youth engagement in this work. We had a lieutenant governor touring a club in Minnesota over the summer, and she turned to the club director and she said, kind of off to the side as a sidebar, please bring kids to St. Paul when you come. Don't just have it be adults. So engaging youth as spokespersons in the process is really important. There's many other things you can do. You can testify on a bill. You can attend local council meetings or school board meetings and get engaged that way. You want to add elected officials to your mailing lists, to your newsletters. You want to follow them on social media and think about what is your social media engagement looking like. You want, more sophisticated activity around media engagement would be op-eds or letter to the editor, advocating for issues or telling the story of what your program has been doing in the community. I focus a lot on the state level, so state legislatures, governor, state elected officials, state departments. Also think about your local, your city, your county, your school officials. How do you want to engage them? I find it's really helpful to do a calendar of activities, and there's lots of ways to structure this, but if it's a calendar, you might add other things in it, like thank you notes from youth at the end of a legislative session where they write a handwritten note, or a welcome back to the legislature in January, or an update at the end of the year. So putting some different things in a calendar format can be a really helpful way to do that. If you want to get more sophisticated, this might be like a year 2 or year 3 thing, or this may be where you're at now, is around relationship mapping. So once you get to the next level, you start to think, okay, so we know so-and-so, but how well do we know them? Are they willing to be a champion? Who do we have on our board? Who do we have on our donor list that might also really be connected to Senator so-and-so or Representative so-and-so? And we really need them to do something for us. So it's not just going to be Matt that's going to make that, but it's going to be our board chair or representative. So think about relationship mapping as another key activity or strategy. So again, you might pick 2 of those things to do this year. Whatever's realistic, whatever you feel like is going to be most impactful, whatever activity you feel like is going to drive the results of what your goal is for the year, whether it's funding policy or just relationship building in general. So those are some of the activities. I think the other thing, I'm kind of wrapping up a few ideas here, and then I'll throw it back to Dana in a minute. You know, the good news is that there's already tremendous resources and templates and tools available. And I'll just mention a couple things. So Billy's organization has some examples, I'm sure. The National After School Alliance has templates, they have toolkits, they have examples, they have data, they have more. Their website's a great resource. I'm happy to share what we use at Boys and Girls Clubs. It'll be sort of Boys and Girls Club branded, but it's the same kind of thing that will help, you know, resources around what does a draft advocacy plan look like, or a legislator visit toolkit. We have a meeting checklist that's like kind of the do's and don'ts when you're sitting down with the legislator. In fact, somebody on our team drafted that, and there were some things that I realized I was doing wrong. And I'd done, you know, hundreds of these meetings, and I was like, oh, I always, you know, pass that sheet across to them at the beginning, but that's a distraction. Don't do that, do it at the end, or, you know, those kinds of tips and tricks that are really specific, but really helpful. So we've got lots of tools and resources to help you and to provide support in that way. And I know I've emphasized this, but I love the example from the movie, What About Bob? Where, you know, Richard Dreyfuss presents the book Baby Steps, and Bob Wiley, you know, is just like trying to understand the concept. And, you know, he's got all these challenges with getting to the final goal, which is he needs to get from the psychiatric's office to his home. So he just needs to get out of the room first, and then he needs to go down the hall, and he needs to get in the elevator. And that's kind of how we need to think about this: is what are the first, where do you want to go eventually? What's your home? And what are the kind of things you're going to do along the way, and defining success and understanding, you know, what the why is for you. So, you know, I'm sure we'll have more dialogue, you know, chat and questions around this, but I just want to sort of start with, you know, that broad brush of how we approach advocacy and some of the ways that you know, whether you've been doing it for 10 years or you're just starting, that you can you know, continue to build on. So with that, I think I can throw it over to Dana.
Thanks, Matt. So it's like we planned this or something. There's lots of threads that Matt left that I'm going to pick up on. So hopefully we'll put together a cohesive story. I'm going to share my screen because I want to enable folks to process information in the best way that you learn. By no means do you need to turn your camera on. Also, we're going to share this deck with you after the fact. So if you find something particularly compelling and you're feverishly taking notes, feel free to give your attention to the screen and you'll get everything afterwards. So my hope over the next 10 minutes is for us to talk a little bit about your role, picking up where Matt left off, determining your objectives, which aligns a lot with what Matt was just talking about, what types of data exist to you specifically in the out of school time sphere, and then some presentation tools and resources once you begin, and or if you already are working with data, how to look through your presentations with a critical lens to ensure that your leave behinds, your presentations stay on a staffer's bulletin board, or ideally a legislator's bulletin board rather than in the trash. So your role is, you've got the microphone, but I can't underscore this enough. Your role is to use your voice to both share what your organization and what you need, but you are also charged with a very important role, which is to share young people's voices and young people's experiences, oftentimes with people who don't interact with them very much. And so my portfolio of work right now, I work with a lot of coalitions, lots of 501c4s, and we're working on our legislative plans. And you are in a unique position, whether you know it or not. Even just seeing kids on a daily basis, you know more about how young people are doing, how families are thriving or not thriving, how communities are managing. And that is information that is very valuable. I know that as a parent, I am bombarded with articles every morning about things related to community and public health. And to raise up the voice of the people that you are representing is an incredibly powerful tool. And even if you don't have fancy data collection methods and you're not doing focus groups or coding, it is okay. You have data and you have a platform, and now it's just how do we put those two things together to put young people center stage in a way that people will listen and take what they say into account when working on policy and legislative decisions. So my one other icon, and then we'll get into some more fancy things, which is you've got a microphone, right? And your microphone is for you to share your voice, but most importantly, your young people's voices and your legislators' constituents' voices. And you've got a flashlight. So there are lots of different, I'm sure some of you may have read different books about using data as a hammer, not a flashlight, but you have a lot of information at your disposal and what you choose to share, because you are the expert, right? You are the experts in young people. You are the experts in out of school time. You are the experts in what happens when young people are with caring, supportive adults in nurturing intentional environments and activities. And so what you choose to elevate to the conversation is important. And so how you use your flashlight and what you choose to use your flashlight on is just as important as the material you're going to create itself. And so to that end, right, how do we determine what material we create? I'm so glad you asked that question. So this is a exercise that I take a lot of my clients and lobbyists through. And you'll notice that the planning and some of the stages in here align a lot with what Matt was saying. We've worked together before, so I'm glad that we echo each other's sentiments. But what's really important here is don't boil the ocean. You may have an entire state house filled with legislators. Perhaps think about your top three. And I want to echo something that Matt said. Your stakeholders may not be your state senator. It may not be your rep. It may be your school council. It may be your mayor. It may be your Parks and Recreation director. So think about which stakeholders are most important to your why, to your immediate why. And I know that during COVID and during the pandemic, your why can change by the moment, depending on what your community and your young people need. So I don't take that lightly. So who do you need to communicate with? What do they care about? What are you currently saying to them? Could be nothing. Could be they get the same newsletter that everybody else gets. Great. Then they know you. They know your mailing address. They know your return envelope sticker. They know your nonprofit stamp. Whatever the case may be, they're familiar with you. What do you wish you could say? So the way that I like to pose that question, it helps people think about this differently. If your organization was on the cover of the New York Times, what would you want the headline to be? And so oftentimes like Boys and Girls Clubs of Boston ends youth opioid crisis. Okay. Let's talk about that. What can you own, right? So I'm going to go back to something Matt spoke about earlier about coalitions and advocating independently and advocating as a coalition. Oftentimes, some of the outcomes and data and work that we as individual organizations try to work toward or claim aren't necessarily wholly our own. And so it is a great opportunity if you're working towards a coalition framework for advocacy to bring the people who are also contributing toward that same outcome into the conversation, because it only allows you to have a stronger voice, right? Multiple microphones all saying the same thing means that multiple touch points are going into those legislators' offices with the same exact conversation. It's like multiple op-ed pieces in every local paper printing the same story over and over again. which is something we've done before, and I'll talk about that in a moment. What data do you have? If you don't have any, that's okay. I'm going to show you something about how you can create something from nothing and still have something to say. And then what are you lacking? And I want you to pay really close attention to this piece. What are you lacking that aligns with your existing program and strategic goals that will enable you to present what you need? Back in the early 2000s, right, when data collection and accountability and KPIs and all the alphabet soup related to data collection, when that became an important thing in the funding sphere, the funders, at least in New England, it was the tail wagging the dog, right? Our funders were telling us what we needed to collect. And what I have found as nonprofits, as we've gained our sophistication in this space, if a nonprofit organization steps up to the plate and says, this is our evaluation plan and here's what we're measuring, people are really impressed and they're like, all right, cool. I'm going to let you take the lead and I can't wait to see what you find. So don't collect data for data's sake. Don't collect data for legislators' sake. Collect data for your program and your young people's sake. I'm going to say that one again because it's really important. Don't collect data for your legislators' sake. Don't collect data for your funders' sake. Collect data for your program and the health of your young people's sake. And everyone will be better for it, I promise. So you'll see my tongue-in-cheek use of Cookie Monster as just an example of how you may or may not populate this grid. I made a worksheet for you, so you'll have this as an after action. You can document this the days go on. I found this to be a really helpful activity when you have some chart paper and post-it notes, but it's a really good collaborative activity. It's also really cool if you want to start bringing some frontline staff into the conversation. I found that when you bring frontline staff into advocacy conversations, they feel really inspired and empowered to be at a point where they can impact some really important things for their young people that they're serving. So what data do you have, right? As out of school time organizations, you've got attendance, participation, and membership data, right? That's a lot of the stuff that Billy was showing on that really cool interactive map. You've got, some folks may have outcomes, some folks may not. Totally cool, don't sweat it. You may have quality data. Some folks may be familiar with the youth program quality assessment. Some folks may be familiar with the APT, the assessment protocols tool out of Wellesley Centers for Women in Massachusetts. You may not, also cool. And you have program and lived experiences, right? What is happening? How are your young people feeling? How do they feel about your program? When you put those pieces of the puzzle together, it provides a holistic view of your organization. But if you only have one puzzle piece, that's great. Some people may not even have a puzzle piece. That's okay too. I'm going to move on just for the sake of time. So this is a piece of material that we put together in Massachusetts when we did a phased series of data communications. And what we did in the state, it was a coalition of 42 501c3s. We didn't have a whole lot to say in the beginning. All we had was, we as the 42 unique organizations are committing to doing the same survey tool. We know what the survey tool is going to be, and we know what we hope to get out of it. But that's all we had. We got a survey tool. We all want to take it. That's it. And so what we found was that this was actually a pretty powerful legislative opportunity because we brought our legislators into the conversation. What do you want to see about young people? What do you want to know about young people? How can our data collection inform your work? If we were to collect that data, when would you need it? How and when can we follow up with you to get your feedback on our progress? And some legislators actually really took us up on that, which was great. Having the Department of Education ask for a mid-year follow-up and ask how our data collection was going is a really cool thing, because that means it's on their calendar and they're putting the meeting on instead of us. What data did we have available? The survey tool and how many people responded. And so what we did was we turned that into an asset. what's important to us, right? What are we shining our flashlight on? And then how many clubs participated? And then once we began to build that muscle memory of a statewide data collection framework, we were able to do something more, we were able to do things that were more sophisticated. And so here's a heat map with food insecurity rates, and then our locations on top of it. We sliced some outcomes by club attendance that we could see the relationship between attendance and healthy eating. And then we looked at some outputs around snacks and meals. And so we were able to put together a bunch of different data. That did not happen overnight. This is the result of 10 years of work. So what Matt said of baby steps, like sometimes it is glacial, but as long as you invite people along on your journey and they feel like they have a voice, they're along for the ride. I'm going to leave this deck. I'm just going to go through this quickly. Here are some of my favorite data visualization tips and tricks. And I pulled out the ones for graphs or presentation modes you may typically use most often. Our eyes and our brains like order. They like when things make sense. They like when things flow logically. So that first bar chart, inevitably when you say like insert chart, the way you enter your data in that Excel thing that pops up in PowerPoint is the way it's going to present. So be mindful that if you present something in a way that flows more logically, the brain is going to say, oh, I like this. I'm going to read this. Beware of the pie chart with many segments and make sure that what you're trying to communicate is able to come through. Keep it simple to avoid confusion. Like if I don't know what I'm looking at, I'm going to throw it away. And I know like when you give somebody a one pager, this is back in the days when folks were going to the State House, when you give somebody a one pager, you've got like 10 seconds to see if that staffer is going to keep that page or throw it in the trash. And if you give them something that is confusing to the eye and confusing to the brain, that piece of paper is not making it to your legislator's desk. So you want to ensure that how you are visualizing that information is pleasing to the eye so that it's more likely your outcome is, I want this paper on so-and-so's desk. There is an activity here at the end, which you can do after I look at this deck, just spotting the differences between these two same data, right, just presented differently. And if you were to go through this exercise, it can help reinforce some principles around, oh, if I want to, why is one more pleasing to me? Okay, cool. Why would I want to put data labels at the end versus in? Okay, why do I never want to use a 3D bar graph? Okay, if you've done any of those things, it is okay. You don't need to admit them, that's fine. But there are tons of resources out there about effective data visualization. And there is, I put them at the bottom here. This is the woman that I follow most closely. But that is all to say, it's your microphone, it's your flashlight, and it's your stage. And so you are empowered and you have everything. Even if you don't have data, you have something to say. Don't think that you don't. And I will pass it back to you, Billy, for questions.
That's awesome. Dana, I'm going to start my questions with you just because this is fresh on our mind, right? So here's my question. What if you have, let's say you have some data, I don't know what this is, but let's say you have some data to share, but it's not really positive for your program, but that's all you have. What do you do then?
I love that question. We did an entire advocacy plan around bad data. Bad, right? There's no such thing as bad data. And I'm going to take that comment or question, and some people who may be in the fundraising sphere may have heard this before. If you want advice, ask for money. And if you want money, ask for advice. So if you have bad data, right? Let's use bad outcome data. 95% of the kids in my program are vaping. Okay. That's fine. I need money to run my program. I know that the AG's office is working on something with Juul vaping products because they have a lawsuit. And I want the Boys and Girls Clubs to be the first organization they think of when they make that settlement. Okay, cool. Then I'm going to put together, like, my job is to say, this is the state of young people. And I happen to be the one that's collecting this data. So A, you're welcome. I'm collecting this information. B, this data is a little bit depressing, but it's my job to share with you how young people are doing. And C, now that I've collected this data, I plan to do something about it. And so I need your help in helping to improve this outcome. I am committed to our young people. This data does not shine the best light on their behavior. And I want to ask for your help in changing this data. And by virtue of you, like you can put whatever in there, right? Our young people are fighting more. Our young people aren't as, right? Let's use some program experience stuff that's more typically inside baseball. Our young people aren't having as much fun. Okay. I want to create a program where we're focusing more on fun because I know that our young people are really stressed right now. Great. You can always spin it in a way where my data says this, I want it to be here. I need you to give me money, change this legislation, fill in the blank. I need you to do something to help me get here. And by virtue of you using the data as your leverage point, you now have that person both invested in your outcome, but also invested in your data collection. So you give yourself a natural opportunity to put those meetings in place in between where your data is and where your data is going to say, I'm going to follow up with you in 6 months and let you know how we're doing. And that could align with your advocacy plan about which Matt spoke earlier.
And the important piece is to put that in your calendar or follow up, right? Like don't say you're going to do something and not do something. It's so easy to just send that email. I have a question for both of you, but I would like Dana to answer first and then I'll switch it over to Matt. But how do you balance youth voice? And I say that to clarify, like, how do you balance not just shoving a kid in front of, a senator or a mayor or a council person? Like, how do you balance, like, what is their interest in and what is your interest, right?
A few ways. I like to control the narrative, especially when you're putting young people in potential places of discomfort, potential exploitation, whatever the case may be. Have young people present the data. That's what we're doing with Rhode Island. If you've got a data presentation, they're presenting the data about themselves. Have young people be present, but not in the room. You've got quantitative data, but you have qualitative data. So how do you include their stories and their feedback without, right? Sometimes even getting kids out of school is hard. So you can make them part of your conversation and part of your assets without bringing them into the space. That would be my big suggestion. If it's someone that you haven't met with yet and you don't know how they interact with young people, you want to test the waters first and see how they respond to youth voice before you bring somebody into the room or into the conversation, because they trust you as their trusted adult to be the broker of what's safe and right for them.
Yeah, no, that's right, Dana. And I would add that I think of youth voice in two very different ways, distinct ways, I should say. One is that you're having them be a spokesperson or talk, like Dana said, talking about the data. They're engaged in a role in which their job is as a spokesperson for your program, right? And that is a little bit in the category of dog and pony show. Like they are sort of serving in a role to advance your organization. And then the second area, when I say youth voice, is really more programmatic. I think there's actually programmatic in both, because I think if you give youth a chance to get up there, and I've done this before where they come and testify, I mean, or they get to meet the governor or something like that, there's a very programmatic like youth development thing happening there. Even better than that is when you actually form, and this is more of a teen initiative, where you form like a youth advisory council or some sort of group that has agency on their own to advocate for issues that they want to advocate for. And we've started to try to do more work at Boys and Girls Club, and I know the Y does youth in government. There's other examples, and we've had groups say like, educational equity is an issue in our community. We're going to take on something where we're going to advocate around that. Or we really care about climate awareness and climate change or LGBTQ issues. And the youth are driving, they're setting the agenda, they're having the meetings, they're coordinating all the work. And so I see two very different tracks around the area of youth voice and youth advocacy, both of which are really important.
Matt, I have a question for you. more specifically, like, what do you do? Well, first, before I ask this question, if you have a question that you're interested in asking, we're going to get ready to open that up to everyone, or you can post it in the chat as well. So that is completely up to you as you guys are thinking through this. But my question to you, Matt, is what do you do if like, let's say a legislator or a mayor or someone that you're advocating with, what if they ask you a question you don't know the answer to? Like what is the best way to respond to something like that?
Yeah, I usually try to be transparent in how we communicate with our lawmakers. And so it's way better to say, I don't know the answer to that. I will get back to you by, next week, or once I talk to so-and-so. So part of me is like, be transparent, be honest. The challenge is if you're in the room and you feel like you should know the answer, that's a really challenging situation. So I was drafting a report for a state agency, and I was realizing as we were going through it that there were answers to questions they might ask that I didn't know. So I pulled that information out of the report, right? I didn't want to talk about something that we couldn't then talk more in depth about. But I think it's helpful to be honest and transparent, and approach it that way. I think that's going to build, because I think at the end of the day, and I didn't say this before, this is a relationship-based work, right? This is no different. There's different aspects of it than, like, say, donor development or donor private fundraising, but this is the same thing. And I encourage folks to see their elected officials as donors or potential donors and working and stewarding those relationships. And so that's a relationship that's going to be successful based on transparency and honesty, and they're going to respect that as well. So that's my initial reaction to that, Billy. I actually want to throw a question to you, Dana, a couple comments and questions. One, I used the bubble chart that came out of Massachusetts, which was not featured in your deck, but is a really another great way of presenting data, which is we were able to compare our statistics against the general population. And when you look at it on a line graph, you've got our data on success kind of was over here with one color, and then not, somewhere less than that was generally the general population data, which I appreciated. Dana, my question for you is on going back to bad data. I have a very specific challenge. We were working with a group of students in a state, and we served 1,800 in this program, but we only did pre-tests of 400, and we only did post-tests of 82. And in our report, I'm like, we can't even talk about the pre and post. Like, it just can't be in the report because we screwed up the data collection. Like, the data was bad because we didn't do, and the data was actually good, but it was bad because we couldn't communicate. It wasn't, what would you say, the sample size wasn't representative, it wasn't statistically significant. So I don't know if there's a different way of approaching it than the way I suggested.
Yeah, I thought you were going to add another log on the fire and say the kids who took the post test weren't the kids who took the pre-test, and then I was just going to throw my hands up and say so that is not uncommon. Also, lots of programs have attrition, right? So the kids who came in the beginning may not be this like kids who end the program. My recommendation there is that the data isn't for nothing, but I would use that data and I would do some analysis and see where there were some bright spots, where there were some things where the program went right. And rather than use that data, because you're right, you can't, it's not statistically significant, it wouldn't be able to stand on its own. I would create some focus group questions from that, and then go back into the program and build and pull together small groups of young people that are randomly selected that do a good job of demographically representing the program and asking questions that relate to your findings. And then you can use some of that qualitative data as a, hey, and talk about that process, right? Like, the more you can own and be transparent about, like, we did our best. And the fact that you had 400 respondents to a pretest is a pretty stellar thing to shout from the rooftops, to say, we have the capacity to do this right. Something didn't go great. We used the information so that we didn't lose the opportunity to learn. And here's what we found when we actually talk to our young people again. And here's what we're going to do next time with our data strategy.
Thank you. And Billy, I was going to jump in on that question in the chat that Mark put in.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, I like to think of all of our stakeholders as advocates. That's parents, that's youth, that's staff, that's donors, board members, community volunteers. And so I think one of our greatest untapped resources is our staff. And so part of it is sort of a mentality, like if we've all gone and visited different programs and we've seen what a really well-run or well-organized program is. You walk in, if I'm a VIP legislator, sometimes there's a sign that says welcome so-and-so, and kids are there to greet them, and their whole process is really robust and smooth. And I think that starts with your front level staff and just equipping them, training them, preparing them. It's a mindset thing. I've also found, shockingly, that it's surprising what the staff relationships might exist. Billy, when you and I first met, you started talking about some of your relationships with legislators, and I was like, how does this guy know so-and-so and so-and-so? I mean, and it was all this, there's all this untapped potential because people in the club, in the program, knew legislators, and we started to help figure out what the mapping could look like and how we would engage a legislator moving forward. So I think, first of all, get them engaged, have them trained, have conversations, and then help them be effective in that role as the program staff when you have elected officials on site. And I'm trying to think, Mark, I'll give it some thought if there's tools or resources we have that can help equip staff. But I know we've tried to do that at Boys and Girls Club to some degree, with some success.
I would like to add a little bit to that too, and just say that your frontline staff, especially, like, one, they know more than we do, right? Like they know probably more than you do, especially about that relationship piece, but more about the relationship piece about what they're doing, right? Like I would say something that really shook me and changed me last month is at our Fireside chat, we had Secretary Sanderson. So Tiffany Sanderson is our Department of Ed secretary, and we had a youth panel. So she spoke a little bit about ESSER funds, and then we had a youth panel afterwards in the second half. And I had asked the youth, like, what's the next thing for them? Like, what does the future look like? And she jumped in and corrected me in the most prolific way. She said, instead of asking you what your career is, she goes, I would like to know what problems you want to solve in the world or in your community. And I think just that positioning of, tell me about what you know and tell me how you're handling yourself, or telling me what you're passionate about, really changed their interaction, right? If I asked a kid, what do you want to be when you grow up, which wasn't my question, but like, that's a tough question. It's going to be a firefighter, whatever the box answer is. But she really dug into a little bit more of like who they are as a person. And I think that is a really, really big piece. I'm going to share with you just this little picture, right? So this is Senator Thune, as everyone in South Dakota would know, and even outside of South Dakota, right? Like Senator Thune is one of the highest ranking Republican senators that we currently have. This is at our Empower campus, and these are two young men. The gentleman in the blue is Sarafo Burhani. It was the Boys and Girls Club Student Empire Youth of the Year. Next to him in the cream shirt would be Alazar Nagash. Now, Alazar was in our panel last month as part of the youth piece. I bring this picture up to simply say, we put two youth, when Senator Thune came to visit at the Empower campus for the Boys and Girls Club, we put these two youth in there. Now, we did some prep work with them to say, here is a question that you should do, and here's what you should talk about. Now, we're not giving you new data to talk about. I'm not giving you a data sheet or anything like that, because we didn't have time. This sometimes when these visits happen, it's like a day or two before. But what the senator did, and he's just a humble person, is he sat down and said, what do I need to know? And surprisingly, Alazar turned to him and said, well, it's time for you to start listening to us, right? And really like empower what that means. And that was a really bold statement for an 18-year-old to tell a high-ranking senator. But the senator said, you're right, tell me more, and leaned back in his chair, right? I also have to share with him that at the end of that session, this was roughly, I want to say April or May, they went out and got an invitation to their graduation party and handed it to the senator. It was big. Did the senator come? No, he definitely did not come, which is obviously, but he sent them both a gift. He sent them one of his Senate folders, like tablet things that he had partially used. and sent that. And I said, guys, that is a huge honor for him to do such a thing. So I really think when you talk about youth, when you talk about just really get people comfortable and have them ask some bold questions that they might want to know, right? That they want to be able to do. So what other questions do we have? Those are great questions, Mark. And I kind of delineated a little bit, but I think those are big moments. What other questions do we have? Anyone want to come off mute and ask a question of these two lovely folks? Usually this is some awkward silence, right? Filled with maybe someone coming off mute or someone coming off questions, but we are, as we're waiting to see if anyone does, please come off mute. I'm gonna stop my conversation, but I will talk a little bit more about Day of the Capitol that's coming up. To say we at the South Dakota After School Network will have data packets ready for all 105 congresspeople that we'll hand out. They'll be individually marked. We'll have all that information. If you have information you would like to submit and put in there from your programs, or you would like to get into the hands of legislators, please email me that information. I think everyone has my contact, especially looking at the list of people here. I think everyone has emailed me at some way, shape, or another. If not, go to our website at sdafterschoolnetwork.org. It doesn't look like we have much questions. I want to say huge thank you to Matt and Dana for coming on today. It was really fun to reconnect to these folks and just kind of share with the knowledge that they have. I think everyone's walking away with probably a lot more. You may not have felt like you pushed a lot out, but you did push a lot of information out, especially to new advocates, which is really great and challenging us. I also want to note that on February 16th, yes, February 16th is going to be our next Fireside Chats. For all the Star Wars fans in the audience, it is titled Jedi, which really sounds cooler than it is, but it is also really cool. It's a DE&I focus by adding justice into what that looks like. So when you rearrange those letters, we are going to be talking about a lot about restorative justice and what that looks like in after school, to be able to move through that. I'm going to make a last